the official Winona County Board of Appeal and Equalization for tonight. We need just basically to approve the meeting minutes.
Yep.
Okay, we need to approve the meeting minutes from the June 16th meeting here at the county board.
I will move to approve the meeting minutes from the June 16th meeting.
I move to approve, Kavesi.
Okay, we've got Commissioner Jacob making the motion. Commissioner Kavesi.
Oh, I didn't hear him.
I
didn't hear him. Sorry.
Okay, can you hear? We'll do a test. Can you hear?
Can you hear me
I
now?
can hear you, but I can hear
Try it
Marcia.
again, please. Yeah, try it again, please, Steve.
Can you hear me now?
Not very well,
Better.
but yes, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll try and talk directly into. So we have a motion by Commissioner Jacob, seconded by Commissioner Kavesi to approve the meeting minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Meyer says aye.
Okay, everybody is aye. So that motion passes. And now just a motion to adjourn.
I will make the motion to adjourn the meeting. Second.
Okay, we have a motion made by Commissioner Jacob, seconded by Commissioner Olson to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 Meyer says aye.
Okay, we're adjourned.
That's feedback.
All right, we have just a few minutes now before the full county board.
Okay, I'm going to keep trying to get in.
Yeah, and so we, just so you know, Chris and Marie, you're a box on the screen with a phone. And when I know you want to say something, the box seems to turn like a green around the perimeter. I don't know if the hand, can you try and raise your hand? Well, no, you can't.
No, you can't
No,
see
we
that.
don't.
No.
But
Okay,
We
when
don't
you
have any,
try- when-
I don't have any visual. Yeah,
right.
sorry.
When we make a sound, that is when the box will light up.
Right. So it may be a little cumbersome or delayed, or I apologize for.
But the problem is we don't have any visual for what's happening on your end.
Oh, you don't know what we're doing.
No, we don't have any.
Yeah,
It's like just like talking on the phone.
Yeah, you can't see the board. No. Okay.
No, there's no visual.
Yeah, we got a lot of people joining. Let's see, somebody got there. Who can we test if they got in? Ron Ganrud? Ron Ganrud, are you there? Oh, there's Jeff Mueller. Jeff, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. I can see you just fine.
How did you log in? Because we had two commissioners that are having problems. How did you come in?
Just logged in the link that Heidi had sent out with the board packet.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
it didn't work for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, who's Brian's phone? Do we know who Brian is?
That's Brian from Post Bulletin, probably. Oh,
And
right.
Bill Engelman? Do we know Bill? I don't know Bill. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
We have
I
two
don't know who that
commissioners
is, but I could hear you.
problems.
Ron
Who was
Gannon.
that? Oh,
Ron
Ron.
Gannon.
Okay, I thought it was Jeff. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he was on too.
Yeah, I don't have any visual. I can't.
Darn.
Hey, Ron, did you come in on your phone?
Yes.
Okay. So we got video on Ron on his phone.
Yeah, so I don't know.
Well,
why
that's interesting.
Chris and Marie.
And see, last week, I don't know if it was my internet or what, but I had to reconnect 5 times. And before you need to reconnect, it fades off and I couldn't hear people. And then it completely stops and it tells you to reconnect. And you push, so I mean, I lost a lot last week in the working session.
Curiosity, do Chris and Marie, do you have the both? Who do you have as your internet provider?
Ours is the other one, Spectrum.
But I have internet now.
Okay.
I mean, I can get to other sites.
Are you trying to log in, Chris?
Yes.
Stay as a phone. Are you going to do
Well,
video?
I can't get in. So
Can't get
I
in.
will be on the phone. Yeah. And yes, I have internet because I can get to other websites. I can get to the county website. So.
Is
Madam.
it HBC or is it who's the provider? I don't know if there's we got to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, it's not my internet service. I have internet.
Okay. All right.
Madam Chair, could we inquire if the commissioners have tried logging totally out and then come back in and then tried to connect?
Yes.
Yes, I've rebooted my machine twice.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm trying another, I'm trying on the, not on the laptop, on the other machine. And I think I'm getting in. It says already joined by phone.
Yeah, we see your name on the box there.
Yeah, I got a name on the box. That's progress.
Chris.
No
Chris
video,
is
but
there.
there's a name there.
And I got a little box down on the bottom that has my name with a phone. I'm going to hang up on the phone and see what happens because I can always call back. I see Chris Rogers.
Okay. I switched to use, I normally use Google Chrome. And I switched to
We lose Marie totally. Yeah. It's
okay.
No, I'm in.
I switched to Google Chrome.
Yeah, I'm in. I haven't opened my video yet. There you go.
There we go.
All right, I'm going to turn the light on so I don't have all that behind me.
Yeah, and apparently it does not like Chrome, the Chrome browser.
not all commissioners present with video and in person. Okay, we will call the meeting to order. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the
The
flag
flag of the United
States of America.
America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hear it in my good ear. All right. Public, this portion of our meeting will be public comment, and there is nobody here at the boardroom. Is there anybody out in the computer hinterland video that would like to comment? Is there anybody online that would like to comment? And again, last time, is there anybody in the wild world of web like to comment? Okay, seeing nobody, we will move on to item 3 on our agenda, approval of the county board meeting minutes from June 9th.
I'll move approval. Second.
I have a question.
Yes.
Greg Olson's name was not listed as being present, but later in the meeting, he made a motion.
Was that the meeting you came in a little late?
It might have been, but he should be listed as present.
Madam Chair, he is noted within the minutes when he came into the meeting. I believe it was like 9:17.
Yeah, it was a later.
Okay.
There is a bullet point for it. I remember seeing it. Okay. All right. So, so we have a motion by Commissioner Jacob, second by Commissioner Olson to approve the meeting minutes from June 9th. We'll do roll call vote. Commissioner Meyer. Commissioner Meyer.
Aye.
Okay. Commissioner Kavesi.
Kavesi votes aye.
Commissioner Olson.
Olson, aye.
Commissioner Jacob.
Jacob, aye.
And Ward, aye. Okay, so the meeting minutes are approved. All right. Moving on to item 4, acknowledge receipt of the approved committee meeting minutes. 4.1 is the Board of Adjustment from February 20th.
I'll move to acknowledge those approved committee minutes. Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Jacob, second by Commissioner Olson to acknowledge the receipt of the approved committee meeting minutes from the Board of Adjustment. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Commissioner Meyer.
Meyer votes aye.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Kavesi votes aye.
Commissioner Olson.
Olson, aye.
Commissioner Jacob.
Jacob, aye.
And Ward, aye. So those acknowledge receipt approved. Consent comments and approval of the agenda. Mr. Fritz,
I have
anything?
nothing to add.
Okay. Commissioner Meyer.
Nothing, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Kavesi.
Kavesi, I have 2 announcements at the end.
Okay. 2 announcements. Okay. Commissioner Olson.
I'll pass.
Okay. Commissioner Jacob.
Nothing for me.
And Commissioner Ward has nothing. So with that, a motion to approve the presented agenda then, when nothing was changed.
I will move to approve the agenda. Second.
Right, we have a motion by Commissioner Jacob, second by Commissioner Olson to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion? If not, roll call vote. Commissioner Meyer.
Meyer votes aye.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Kavesi votes aye.
Commissioner Olson.
Olson, aye.
Commissioner Jacob.
Jacob, aye.
And Commissioner Ward, aye. All right, so that's approved. So Mr. Fritz, would you read the consent business into the record, please?
Be happy to. The consent business department recommendations, 6.1, appoint member to Workforce Development Board. 6.2, approve amended county board ground rules. 6.3, approve monthly resolution. 6.4, confirm payment of disbursements. That completes the consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Second.
Okay, awesome. We have a motion by Commissioner Jacob, second by Commissioner Olson to approve the consent business as read. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Commissioner Meyer.
Meyer votes aye.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Kavesi votes aye.
Commissioner Olson.
Olson, aye.
Commissioner Jacob.
Jacob, aye.
Commissioner Ward votes aye. So that is approved. Consent business approved. All right, moving on. 7.1, received presentation on Lake Winona, Gilmore Creek Watershed Targeted Implementation Assessment. And is that Sheila? Sheila Harms? Sheila, are you with us? I saw her earlier. Sheila Harms? Water Quality Improvement Plan? Where did she go? Sheila? Sheila with us?
Greg Wilson? Who's going to present it?
Good evening. This is Greg Wilson with Bar Engineering Company. I'm prepared to give the presentation. I'm not, even if Sheila's not available right now.
Okay, all right.
Would you like me to go ahead and start?
Yes, please. We can hear you good. Just one question, Greg, for my, can Commissioner Meyer and Commissioner Kavesi hear? Okay,
Thumbs up.
all right.
Yes.
All right, go ahead. Just Commissioner Meyer, you are very faint. We're barely hearing you respond. So,
I will try to talk louder.
okay, all right. Okay, Greg, if you'll go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you. And I'm happy to be here tonight with you all to talk about Lake Winona and water quality improvement plan to restore the lake. If somebody could advance me to a couple slides here, maybe go to the next one. I can give you just some background on what we were doing, what we were hired for, and what our primary objectives were for the project. Working together with WHKS on this project, and BAR and WHKS were hired then by both the county and the city. Then they were working jointly with funding, outside funding from the state, to study why we had elevated phosphorus levels in Lake Winona, and to what degree that was causing water quality problems for each basin of the lake. So we were hired to evaluate the possible solutions for reducing the phosphorus contributions to Lake Winona. That was our primary objective. You'll go to the next slide, please. I think it's worth providing a little bit of background on why we cared about phosphorus. So we've talked about that being our primary objective. Phosphorus being a nutrient that limits algal growth in the lake, and the algae being the component of each lake that makes things a little more green. And so whether it's photosynthetic plants or the algae that are suspended in the water, they both are relying on nutrients. The plants, as you can kind of see in the figure on the left, are primarily drawing their nutrients from the sediment and the brown areas of the bottom of each lake. We have two lake basins, one being a little shallower than the other one. The second basin, the southeast bay of the lake is a deeper lake with maybe not quite as many plants as the northwest basin. But the figure on the right shows how the food web interacts and what is affecting nutrients in the mobilization of nutrients in these lake systems, as well as what the other life, other forms of life in the food web that rely on nutrients in some form or fashion. And so we've got the zooplankton that feed on algae, and then you just go right up the food web to your largest fish species that rely on, sort of systematically rely on the primary productivity, which is really driven by these nutrients. The benthic organisms, including rough fish such as carp, they can actually contribute some of those nutrients by stirring up the bottom of the lake or just excreting nutrients directly themselves. And so that in turn can have an effect on the amount of algae that will grow in a lake, or the balance that you might have between algae and plants in the lake. So these are all factors that influence the lake water quality that we see in each one of the two bays of Lake Winona. You'll go to the next slide. If we have too much phosphorus, what does that actually mean? Usually it does mean then that we're going to get more algae. That phosphorus is typically the nutrient that limits that algal growth. So you get too much of it, it's going to cause algal blooms. And so if you've got a Secchi disc, for example, and you drop that in the water, if it disappears within the first foot, then you probably have an algal bloom, and that's going to cause the water to look green. Whereas we kind of want the water to be a little clearer. In the state, in Minnesota, our shallow lakes, we want at least 3 feet of transparency. We don't want to see that Secchi disc until it's at least 3 feet into the water. For our deeper lakes where we want to support swimming, we want that Secchi disc to go down at least 5 or 6 feet. And then if we don't see it, as we drop it further into the water, if we lose sight of it right at the 5 or 6 foot, in that 5 to 6 foot range, then we are probably in very good shape in terms of water quality. So what's decreasing that transparency then is the algae growth. And then when we get too much algae, that in turn can kind of start a vicious cycle where as bacteria come along and decay the algae, they need to use up the dissolved oxygen, and that typically happens at the bottom of the lake, and then that in turn results in, because of water chemistry, results in more release of phosphorus and kind of makes more phosphorus available for future algal blooms. Especially as you move throughout the summer. Go to the next slide, we can talk more about those sources of phosphorus that we typically see in our watershed studies. These external sources are primarily driven oftentimes by stormwater runoff. We have a lot of impervious surfaces in the watershed. That's going to generate more runoff. The runoff is picking up material along the way that contains phosphorus, for example, leaves and grass clippings. You might have some starter fertilizers in Minnesota have phosphorus in them. And if you've got pet or animal waste or even just erosion from lawns or from stream banks, that can have phosphorus in it, as well as failing septic systems or non-conforming septic systems will also typically contribute phosphorus to the system. So these are all sources of phosphorus that are coming in from the watershed side of the equation. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk more about internal sources. I already mentioned that as algae decays at the bottom of the lake, it uses up dissolved oxygen. That in turn can lead to phosphorus release. And so then these are really internal sources, along with the sediment and the excretions from carp that can also lead to internal sources of phosphorus that become mobilized in the bottom of each lake bay. These then we refer to this typically as internal load for these sources of phosphorus. If you can go to the next slide. So I hope you can see this. I realize the font here is fairly small, but what we're really trying to do is show some of what I talked about before, the state standards for Secchi disc, for example. Thank you. If you look on the way right, Secchi disc in meters, we've got two standards that apply. One to the deeper part of the lake, the Southeast Bay. 1.5 meters, that equates pretty close to about 6 feet. And then I talked before about 1 meter, about 3 feet in the Northwest Bay being our goal. And really to get those kinds of transparencies, you want to keep chlorophyll levels. Chlorophyll is a measure of the amount of algae in the water. You want to keep those concentrations at about 14 or less in the deeper bay and at 20 or less parts per billion in the shallower bay. And then chlorophyll, as we talked before, is generally, and the amount of algae that's growing is driven by the amount of phosphorus. And so as I move farther to the left, our standard then becomes 40 parts per billion for total phosphorus in the Southeast Bay and 60 in the Northwest Bay. There's 3 separate years of monitoring that have been done in the past, including the last year that was done as a part of this study that I'm talking about. And generally, you can see that we're exceeding these criteria for each one of the 3 major parameters that MPCA is paying attention to when they determine whether or not the lake is meeting water quality standards. And then if it is not meeting water quality standards, they put it on the impaired waters list. And that's really what had previously happened with Lake Winona, and then kind of why this study became evolved the way it did as well. So, but ultimately you can see that we've got somewhat higher phosphorus levels. So most of what we did with the rest of our study, then if you want to go to the next slide, is really try to pay attention to what our sources of phosphorus were in the watershed and what we could do about mitigating those sources of phosphorus. If you want to go ahead and skip to two more slides here. Thank you. I guess maybe give me one more slide. There you go. So this is a figure that shows our watershed that is tributary to the two bays of the lake. And the lighter green areas kind of show that our land cover is primarily either forested or to some degree agricultural, hay pasture type land cover in the upper parts of the watershed. And then you've got Gilmore Creek kind of dissecting from north to south the watershed on the south and the southern part of the watershed. That empties into Bowlers Lake, and then Bowlers Lake, there's a channel that conveys the flow out of Bowlers Lake, and the ditch takes it down to the Northwest Bay, where our sub-watersheds that surround the lake are got those darker red colors to them, which really indicate that we've got more imperviousness. The yellow lines on there show where the storm sewer systems are set up to convey that stormwater runoff into each one of the respective bays. If you will go to the next slide. Go ahead to the next one after this. And again. So this just kind of zooms in a little more into these features I talked about before. We've got Gilmore Creek coming in from the south, where you see the number 2 on the map. That is the first place where the local partners were able to monitor the amount of flow that was going by Gilmore Creek at that location. That's very close to the St. Mary's campus, as well as collecting samples at that location that included phosphorus, as well as a few other parameters. But having flow measurements together with phosphorus concentrations in our water quality samples, we're able to estimate what the total mass of, or the total load of phosphorus is that's going by that location. And then that in turn goes into the eastern basin of Bowlers Lake, goes underneath a road crossing there with a bridge that takes it into the west bay of Bowlers Lake. And then there's a structure there, that little outlet structure that conveys the flow from that lake, is the arrow points down to number 5, where we've got our second location where we're collecting both flow and water quality samples before that flow goes into the northwest bay of the lake. So that was kind of our second main place where we're able to do a mass balance and estimate the amount, the total amount of phosphorus that's conveyed. And then that flow in turn goes from the northwest bay of the lake into the southeast bay. And then there's a third location where we also had the ability to monitor flow and water quality as it leaves the lake basin and goes into the river. So those 3 sites, 2, 5, and 9, were places that we paid particular attention to what was happening when we were monitoring what we saw out there. If you'll go to the next slide, and maybe go to the next one after this. What this figure then shows, we've got some call-out boxes that are attached to each one of those 3 sites. Really what we saw from our 2018 monitoring was that we had about 818 pounds of phosphorus that was conveyed at Gilmore Creek just before it went into Bowlers Lake at a concentration, at flow-weighted concentration of 185 parts per billion. And then what you see is that number is relatively high, especially in comparison to the lake standards. But then even coming out of Bowlers Lake, the concentration and the total load went up even more as just before it went into the northwest bay of the lake. And then you really got, as phosphorus gets transformed within the lake by is taken up by the algae and can settle out, there's a much lower amount of phosphorus that leaves the southeast bay of the lake. So 594 pounds, 76 is our flow weighted mean concentration. So these were three major places that we paid attention to, and we had a watershed model that we used and calibrated to these three primary locations where we had this monitoring data. And so from there, we started to use the watershed model to make estimates about what was happening, where the rest of the phosphorus was coming from in the intervening places, and what it might actually mean for the in-lake water quality implications. So you'll go to the next slide. What we did then, maybe skip ahead a couple more here. What we did here then was that watershed modeling was used to make estimates about what the total phosphorus was that was coming in on a daily basis first to the Northwest Basin. And what you see here are our predictions for the observed, what we think the water quality would have been like with our modeling. This is the straight line. And these concentrations on the left are should be 0.06 is our standard for the Northwest Bay. This is expressed in milligrams per liter, so slightly different. It's just 1,000 units different than the 60 I talked about before. So we're really looking at situations where the estimated phosphorus concentration in this bay of the lake was exceeding that 0.06 level. And then the purple points on the figure show where the actual water quality samples in the lake itself had been measured. So in the end, we're taking this in-lake water quality model, and we had made some changes to how well it was assimilating the phosphorus and accounting for both those internal and those external sources of phosphorus that I talked about, to try to optimize how well it was matching up to what was observed out there. And then from there, we're able to make estimates about where all the phosphorus is coming from, and where we think from there what kinds of changes we can make to improve water quality. So we did a similar thing to what you see here in the southeast bay of the lake, and optimize how well that was predicting the observed water quality as well. If you go to the next slide, I can actually show you a couple different pie charts. So these are our individual sources that we think are contributing the total amounts of phosphorus to each of the respective bays of the lake. With the left pie chart on the expressing our estimates from the north, from what's phosphorus sources we've got coming into the Northwest Bay of the lake. What you can see is that what leaves Buller's Lake is actually a fairly small amount of what comes into the Northwest Bay. It's about 18%. This direct drainage from everything that's both directly north and south of the lake bay itself is about 30%. But then the flow that's coming in through the ditch immediately upstream of the lake bay, that's about 42% of the total, and then the rest being due to internal loading sources. Whereas if you look at the Southeast Bay, internal load was significantly more important, about 25% of the total. The direct watershed, the stormwater runoff coming in directly adjacent to that bay of the lake was about 37%. And then the rest of the phosphorus load, 37%, was the amount of phosphorus coming out of the Northwest Bay as it goes into the Southeast Bay of the lake. So those three major components affect water quality in the Southeast Bay. If you go to the next slide, I can talk about what we did next. So we've got these, and maybe you'll need to shrink this slide, the view down again, so we can see the bottom axes on the, thank you. Yep, so here again, what we've got are just two sets of bar charts. The top one being representative of what we looked at doing to try to improve water quality in the Northwest Bay of Lake Winona. And it was primarily involved a 15% reduction of the watershed load going into Northwest Bay, and primarily focusing in on what we could do to minimize the amount of phosphorus coming in through the Gilmore Creek ditch component. And so that's the kind of relative load reduction that we need to make there to meet that 60 microgram or parts per billion standard in that bay of the lake. If we can meet that 60 microgram per liter standard in the Northwest Bay, that in turn in the bottom bar chart shows what that does to the amount of phosphorus coming into the Southeast Bay of the lake from the Northwest Bay. But then we would also want to make about a 46-pound load reduction from the direct watershed, as well as an 80% reduction to the internal load. And I talked before with the pie chart that that'd be even a more significant component for the Southeast Bay of Lake Winona. So these are three things that we would be recommending for Southeast Bay of the lake. And then in the Northwest Bay, trying to put in structural practice that would get us that 15% load reduction from the Gilmore Creek ditch watershed. If you go to the next slide, please. Then just summarizing then these top 4 items here really are lining up with what I just described in the previous slide, is that we want to get stormwater treatment of the flow before it goes into the Northwest Bay. As it relates to internal load, I talked before about how sediment phosphorus release is one component of that, but that carp can also stir up sediment and they can excrete phosphorus in the process. We know we've got carp levels in the lake, in each of the 2 lake basins that exceed thresholds that we rely on for the health of and the water quality of lake systems. But we don't really know where the carp are moving throughout the year and how they're reproducing. And so really are suggesting a better, making recommendations to try to get a better handle on that for sure, as well as controlling the sediment phosphorus release in the Southeast Bay that I talked about earlier, and then getting that direct drainage, treatment of the direct drainage to the lake. There are other options that can also be considered in the future. We think these are the top 4 here are the ones that we are primarily focused on to meet our goals in each lake bay. But there are some lower priorities that could be considered down the road if there is a need for further phosphorus load reductions. And so they're mentioned here generally. I'll go to the next slide if we could and just talk to us about some other options. So more specifically, one of the options that we looked at then was that treatment of the Northwest Bay. The blue line cutting through the ditch, kind of cutting through the middle of the figure here, just south of the baseball diamond. You can see that that's really where that ditch system comes into the Northwest Bay of the lake. And so we're really talking about is putting in a pond system that would allow us to divert a portion of the total flow before it goes into the Northwest Bay of the lake, divert it into that blue hatched area where we would construct a deeper pond that could settle out much of this sediment attached phosphorus before it then would be allowed to spill over and go back out into the lake through this large wetland complex that you see immediately west of the lake. So this, we believe, will get us that 15% total phosphorus load reduction from the watershed. You go to the next slide. The option that we've got for controlling internal phosphorus load from the lake is an alum treatment, in-lake alum treatment. Apologize, but behind the figure on the right, or the photo on the right, there we've got a picture of a barge, and it just kind of shows how they make that work. They're really going back and forth across the lake and applying this chemical, this alum chemical, which is a common chemical that's getting used for water and wastewater treatment at a municipal level, but in the last 45 to 50 years, it's been used more extensively for treating in-lake sources of phosphorus. And so an example of that is a lake that we worked on here a few years back, where at the beginning of the alum treatment, you can see that the water was very green. It was about 280 micrograms per liter of phosphorus. By the end of the treatment, about 10 days later, the picture on the right shows that it had cleared up quite a bit. Phosphorus levels were down around 50. And then these were levels that were meeting the standard for that particular lake, and has been fairly successful since then. The graph in the upper right shows you an example of another lake project that we've worked on, where this is just the kind of transformation that we see in these lakes, where it's a little tough to read. In fact, I don't have, I can't see it very well myself here, but suffice it to say that that lake is meeting the criteria. The concentrations were actually down around 20. They had started out above 40. So this is a deeper lake where we had done alum treatment. And so actually just by doing this, we kind of dropped those phosphorus concentrations by about half on that deeper lake. And then it's lasted pretty well. All the red bars represent individual years since the alum treatment and how well it has met expectations in that example. If you go to the next slide, please. So how is that alum working? What it really is what we're trying to get out of alum is a form of aluminum that when it forms a flock and it sweeps out phosphorus on the way as it settles down to the bottom of the lake. And it sort of, it's like I said, it's this flock. It sort of almost creates a blanket across the bottom of the lake. And in that it actually will be reactive enough for a couple years, where if there are sources of phosphorus in the sediment that would ordinarily get released, they instead get captured by the aluminum, and it forms a permanent bond that works even under low oxygen conditions. And so this is really the key behind why alum has worked as well as it has for us on other lake projects. You go to the next slide, please. Maybe skip ahead a couple more here. So ultimately, we've looked at these options. We've made estimates about how beneficial they will be, and then also how much they might cost. And so what you've got here is a table that's duplicated right from our report. And I talked about the four major options. Those are the first 4 rows in this table. And really what we're trying to show is the expected benefit that we think we're going to get for each one of those 4 options that we're recommending in terms of phosphorus or total TP reduction in pounds per year, and then what it might cost in terms of the total upfront investment. And then that in turn can be translated into a cost per pound of phosphorus removed. And so what you see from this is that stormwater treatment with that large pond will be beneficial from a cost per pound perspective. In the end, the alum treatment is usually and what we see here is that it is one of the more cost-effective options. And the one option that we're looking at having to make a little bit bigger investment would be to get more treatment of the direct watershed runoff in the Southeast Bay. And so that's a slightly larger price tag to that. The last row on this table is really maybe just a backup plan for the Northwest Bay if some of the other options, whether it's carp control or that stormwater pond, if those don't meet expectations for the Northwest Bay, we know we can always, and we see that if that internal load is important, we can come back and do an alum treatment there as well. So the carp assessment component of this, I will just say that is one of the first things we would recommend get implemented, because we like I said, we don't have the best handle on the where the carp are coming from, where they're going, or how they're reproducing, and where they are going throughout the year. And then from that, what we hope to gain is an ability, and the reason why you see $500,000 in there for that is because we've assumed that we're going to need to implement at least 2 carp areas, maybe one on the downstream end of the lake system and at least one on the upstream end of the lake system to try to control them in the future. So if you will go to the next slide, and just briefly touch on some BMPs that we did also consider. We do get asked about dredging. What we tend to see is that it tends to be very expensive. The benefit from a water quality perspective is limited by the fact that the underlying sediment also has phosphorus in it. May not be at quite as high of levels as it is out there today, but it still will probably contribute internal load even after you dredge. And so that's why we tend to stay away from that option for these situations. There will be probably opportunities as streets get reconstructed in Winona in the future to do other either filtration practices or rainwater gardens, if you're familiar with them. They do come usually with a slightly higher cost unless they can be done as a part of a street reconstruction project. They would also contribute to reducing the amount of phosphorus, especially if the native soils will infiltrate some of that stormwater runoff. And then I think I have one more slide just really to kind of circle back to what we found with our monitoring and modeling results. The stormwater runoff from those direct drainage areas were important. And then especially that ditched area downstream of Bullers Lake, but upstream of the Northwest Bay of the lake. We do see that we need to control sediment phosphorus release as well as the impacts of carp, probably in both bays of the lake. But the upshot from our monitoring is that it looks like Bullers Lake is providing good treatment already for some of the total phosphorus that's derived from the upper parts of the watershed. So our recommendations then is to treat that direct drainage to each bay, control internal phosphorus load, probably after we've got a handle on what's happening with carp in the system. And then from there, you've got a curly leaf pondweed problem. It's an invasive plant. So someday I could see needing to get a lake vegetation management plan put in place that could support measures to address that curly leaf pondweed, but then hopefully promote more healthy lake weed growth that can then in turn support a better lake ecology. So those are my results and recommendations from this study together with WHKS. If you have any questions, I'll take those now.
Questions, Commissioner Jacob.
So the alum management plan that you're describing, if that were implemented, how long does it last? I mean, how long before it becomes ineffective? Or I see by the one graph, it looked like it was 10 years, but how long could you expect that to keep working? Yeah, great question. So it does actually tend to, what tends to impact that more directly is the amount of phosphorus that comes into a lake in the future after you've done that. So in these deeper lakes where there's more of a capacity to where the amount of phosphorus does not impact the lake water quality as much because of how much volume is in a deeper lake. What we tend to see is that alum treatments will last, at least 15, 20 years. I've got one lake project that we did a long time ago, almost when I was starting to work at Bar. And we're expecting that one will be successful for almost 30 years. But now in the shallower lakes, what we tend to see, and in your case with Northwest Bay, being that first basin that is affected by the stormwater runoff coming in from the upper watershed, you might expect that an alum treatment there, which, we're not recommending at this time, but, a smaller lake like that in relation to what's coming into it from the watershed, the treatment effectiveness might be good for 10 to 15 years. It kind of really, it's all over the board with those shallower lakes. So following up on that, your plan shows
basically a catch basin lake prior, and that's where the alum treatment would go. That's what I understand. Isn't that really just relocating the same problem to a different spot?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question.
So you were going to divert the water from Gilmore before it comes into the Northwest Lake into a pond, and that's where the alum treatment would be. Is that what I understand?
No, no, yeah, we wouldn't do an alum treatment in the pond. The pond will.
So where does the alum treatment go?
Say that again?
Where does the alum treatment go?
It goes right into the southeast bay of the lake, where we would just put a barge in, and the barge would have it kind of was obscured behind in a photo that I had in one of my previous slides, but the barge just goes back and forth across the lake and dispersing the alum, and the alum will settle out to the bottom of the southeast bay. And then that covers up the sediment, and it ties up the phosphorus that would ordinarily be getting released from the bottom sediments of the lake. And so that is what we are expecting. We almost certainly would have to do something like that in the future to control the internal load in the southeast bay. Now that pond is just working by settling out the phosphorus that's attached to sediment, to our particulates, or that would sediment out in the pond, and then that treated flow would be allowed to go through the wetland and into the lake from there. So there are two different methods that are really one through settling and one through chemical absorption are each trying to tie up phosphorus. Are there any other questions?
I'd have one further question.
Sure.
Early on, when this Healthy Lake Winona project came to light, one of the first things that the city did was, I believe, to ban feeding geese and ducks so that the geese and ducks wouldn't contribute to the problem. Does that have much of an effect?
Good question. Yes. So as you can expect, in the same way that carp are contributing phosphorus to the lake, the geese might be doing something similar, in that in the same way that we're concerned about pet waste, we'd also be concerned about waste from geese. And what we tend to see is that they're putting their waste right in on the shoreline or very close to the lake, and then that can run off into the lake. So yeah, I think that's a great practice. It's a good practice to do. We didn't really try to say anything one way or the other about that, but there are other lakes where I've worked on them before, where if you have a much smaller watershed and you really just have this direct drainage coming into the lake that's kind of flowing in over land, and that is if that really is a significant component to the mass balance that we do on these lakes, and I've seen other lakes where it has been, then yeah, it's very important to do something about geese, because they can become, maybe 10 to 20% of the problem in those situations. Now, in your case, I wouldn't think it would be quite as important, but you can imagine that the bacteria load from geese alone is a reason to do something about the issue, because it will affect, how healthy it is to be swimming in a lake that has that source of bacteria.
Any other questions? I see nobody. I have a question, and I don't know, Greg, if you can answer it, but we're being asked to put this whole geographic area into a one watershed, one plan area. So is this plan the city's responsibility, or will it be the one water, one plan responsibility? So it's a question of, and you may not answer this, and I don't know if Sheila or Kay or anybody's from staff, but who's going to have the jurisdiction over this plan, and who's going to be responsible for the funding of this plan? And
Yeah,
you
it's a-
talk a lot about stormwater treatment. That, in my understanding, stormwater treatment, that's kind of a city thing. It's not a rural landscape thing. So
Madam
who's
Chair?
doing what?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah. The city received this, thank you, Madam Chair. The city received this same presentation week before last, I think, at a pre-council meeting. And so it is my understanding that that it will be their responsibility and that they will work on it. And I would just add that this study has been extremely helpful. I've heard other assertions, but I think what's very useful is to know that Bowlers Lake is doing what it should, and that a lot of the problem is coming from storm runoff within the city itself, which will be very helpful in terms of forming the plan. That lake was dredged back in the 60s. And as you can see, we're, right back with an overload of phosphorus. So it'll be great for them to address the sources as well as the load that's already in the lake.
We'll see where this one watershed, one plan for this geographic area goes, because it's just a plan. It should be covered by part of it.
I mean, this
right?
would be within it.
Yes, geographically, it would be. Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Madam Chair, can you hear
yes.
me? This is Sheila Harms.
Yes, Sheila, go ahead.
Okay, I had problems with my audio earlier. With respect to one watershed, one plan, this Lake Winona project is within the Mississippi River Winona watershed. So if we do move forward with the one watershed planning, this geographic area would be included in that planning process. Now that we finished, that Bar Engineering and WHKS have finished this assessment work, this puts us in a good place to possibly what we've done with this grant, a joint application with the City of Winona to assist them with a grant application for doing some practices. And this would be, of course, dependent on the City Council's decisions. But if it was a grant through Bowser, we would be able to step in and help them with that grant application. And those usually are in the fall. But all these decisions, yes, these are responsibilities lie with the city. But we can certainly be a partner with them in those future endeavors. Are there any other questions?
I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. Sheila, you indicated that the city could opt out of the one watershed, one plan?
No, I did not say that. I'm sorry, I must have bad connection. No, I did not say that. This geographic area for this study is in the Mississippi River Winona watershed. Yes. If we do have one watershed, one plan planning grant, this geographic area would be included in that planning process as well.
Eligible for funds.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Yep. Thank you.
This was just, no action is required. This is just a presentation,
nope.
Correct?
Yep. This was just one of the deliverables for the grant, was to give presentation to the City Council and also to the County Board.
Thank you, Greg.
Okay,
Sheila.
So with that said, then you need to keep this presentation available for any future one watershed, one plan organization, correct?
Definitely, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. 7.2, receive update on delaying payment to Minnesota Department of Human Services. And
Yeah,
Mr.
we're still not paying it. So, and the legislature hasn't made any changes or any legislation that finalizes the issue. So as the bills come in, the counties, the majority of the counties have chosen not to pay it until it's resolved. So it's still in the same status as it was the last meeting.
Okay, so no news is good news in a way. We're not paying it.
The legislature seems to be busy with other things right now.
And anybody have any questions concerning 7.2? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to 7.3, receive Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation update presentation. Do we have Tim Penny? Is Tim joining us?
There's a video from Tim and Heidi's queued it up right now.
Okay.
Hi, Tim Penny with the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation. This year, given the circumstances, coming to you remotely as opposed to an in-person presentation. But we do like to keep you informed of the work of our foundation in the region. The Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation has been around now for 34 years. Each year we expend roughly $5 million of resources and activities into this 20-county region in south-central, southeastern Minnesota. Our key 3 areas of work are early childhood, entrepreneurship, and community vitality. In response to the current health and economic crisis, we ramped up quickly with responses in these various areas. First of all, we offered over 500 grants totaling over $250,000 to early childhood providers in our region to help them stay in business, help them pay their bills. We also issued about $1 million worth of loans to small businesses across the region. More than 30 businesses received that assistance. We also deferred loan payments for a number of our own loan clients to help them through this challenging time. We offered $100,000 in matching grants to the 30 small town community funds that we help to manage, and we also afforded $30,000 of assistance to partners in the region who work with the local food sector to help these local food producers and processors with marketing and dealing with their challenges at this time as well. All of these activities in response to the COVID health crisis were made possible by the financial support that we received from organizations, cities, counties, banks, individuals across this region, and we're so appreciative of that support, especially at this time. In addition to those activities, we have our ongoing work. Some examples of that are an equity investment with Sonics Health in the Rochester area and dealing with the carpal tunnel health challenge. We've also offered assistance to several communities in our region to help them address child care shortage needs. Among those communities are Austin and Wells and Eagle Lake. And we've offered grant support to the city of St. James for a program to celebrate the diversity of that community. So those are just a few of the examples of work that we've done across the region. So now I'll just share a few examples of our more recent work in your county. In Winona County, in the last couple of years, we've provided over $500,000 of financial support in a variety of ways. That includes one new loan client in your county through our Small Business Emergency Loan Program, as well as deferments to 3 of our existing loan clients in your county who are facing financial challenges at this time. We have at least 10 active loan clients in your county, and also clients who participate in our Prosperity Initiative, which is a business training and coaching program targeted to new immigrant and minority entrepreneurs. We have several people involved in one of our peer councils, which provides ongoing technical support. That includes Bluff Country Co-op, Gypsoil, Whitewater Garden Farms, and Rolling Stone Mini Market. 29 child care providers from your county received emergency grant dollars. 20 early childhood providers from your county attended either our annual Early Childhood Provider Conference or our Conscious Discipline Training program offered last summer. Finally, we provided matching grants to the St. Charles Area Community Foundation. I want to thank Winona County, as well as the cities of St. Charles and Winona, for their ongoing financial support. So those are just a few examples of some of the work that we've done in your county in the recent past. In conclusion, I just want to mention a few things. At the present time, we have our small town grant program underway. In addition, in late September, we have our annual Entrepreneur Bridge Conference for small business training and a college Shark Tank competition. After that, we have our annual Early Childhood Provider Conference, which draws about 500 early childhood providers each year. We also have a feast festival that will be held to celebrate local foods in our region. That's always in early December. And we have Sprout events that celebrate our work, and we hope to reschedule those in the very near future. So if you need additional information, please feel free to reach out to me or visit our website. So again, thank you for your support and for this opportunity to present an update on the work of the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation.
Okay. Well, Mr. Penny's not here, so we can't ask him any questions, but thank you very much for that presentation, and we should send him an email that we received it and we appreciated it. So Ken, could we send him just an email saying
Sure.
we received it, we appreciate their work.
No problem.
All right, thank you. Moving on, 7.4, approve, deny future agenda item to discuss revisiting size of jail. And Commissioner Jacob.
Thank you. So the reason I asked to have this on for a future agenda item is I feel like there's really quite a few things that have changed in the last I'd say 4 months with respect to where we're at with our jail population. And one of the questions that was asked was whether there was any new information, and I believe there is quite a bit of new information. One piece is that the COVID crisis really has given new proof that the video conferencing can be effective, which could greatly reduce the need to transfer inmates from one facility to another. The Wabasha facility has now gone into, discussing completely shutting it down. That's happened just very recently. The public outcry currently is really to defund law enforcement or reduce incarceration, not build bigger jails. And at this point, well, and up till now, historically, I believe the majority of our inmates are housed in what's considered to be the annex, which is the lower security area of our jail. I believe we should be looking at how we can keep those lower risk inmates out of jail rather than building brick and mortar cells for them that we don't exist currently. At this point, yeah, we do have 80 some beds, but we've really only got 35 cells. And we're looking at taking all those beds and building cells. So I think there's a lot of new information there. I think jail configurations could potentially change due to the pandemic that we've been through. And I think it would be unwise for us to move in such a speedy fashion that we don't let those developments play out and build a facility that's right for the future instead of doing what we did. How many times we've heard in that 1978 we built a facility that was immediately out of date. So I don't want to see that happen. I think that's most of the reasons that I think we should. I think those are the reasons that I had new information, and I think it would be wise for us to relook at whether less brick and mortar and more ways to divert the low risk inmates out of our facility, and more video conferencing and utilizing the neighboring facilities. So I'm looking for, right at this point, I've got support from one county commissioner to bring it this far. I'm asking for support from one more county commissioner to reevaluate this and make sure that we're taking the right steps to give the community the best fit into the future.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be willing to proceed with a working session. I'm not an expert on corrections or jail or policing, and neither, no offense to you, Commissioner Jacob, but none of us commissioners are. And so I feel that it would be important to allow the experts that we have make a response. So I would be willing to entertain the idea of a working session, but I would not do that at the expense of moving forward. I would be certainly willing to talk about what new developments there are. You know, as a layman, I've tried to look into a few of them, and the top one seems to be diversion. And we already know quite a bit about diversion here in Winona County. What I wouldn't want to do is say that the jail study that was done is invalid without having some experts being able to examine the points that you've raised. And then maybe some of the points that both you and Commissioner Ward raised the last time we discussed this. So I think there are some real issues with simply allowing our current jail to sunset, and that the do nothing, which I mean the true do nothing option, is simply not valid. So the idea that we can simply wait for 6 years or 3 years or 24 months, I think is completely unrealistic. And I think the experts that we have can give us a better understanding of the exact consequences of a do nothing option. What I would prefer is that I have a set of questions as well, that perhaps we could compile what those are. And I would say try and schedule this working session for as soon as possible, for example, next week. Because I don't think that any of the things you've talked about are giant surprises. We've had a group at the state level looking into policing issues, and you know, defund the police really doesn't mean just take away the money. It means divert some of that money to the jail diversion programs, which are exactly the sort of thing that we've been doing. So in my mind, if we want to reduce the jail population, then we need to have a plan for exactly how that happens. And then we as a county board have to make a commitment to doing the rest of those jail diversion programs. Thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Jacob, I would support having a working session as Commissioner Meyer supported. I see we have, looks like Steve Buswell, Jeff Mueller, Rana, and Karen in the meeting with us. And, you know, I don't know if there's, if the judges have decided they're going to lessen sentences for people, if the people in our annex could be safely, you know, sent home. I know that the transportation with people that are housed in other facilities, they do need to come back for work if they're so employed, and the transportation costs I know are given at the current level of 15 transported to Houston, so we can extrapolate those in some sense to an average daily count of inmates. So let's certainly let's talk about it and see if something has changed that we're not aware of. And I think Commissioner Jacob, you know, has some valid thoughts on it. And I would, last thing I want to do is build a jail, but I'm willing to do it if we have to. So, and I do think we need to keep moving along.
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is
Commissioner Kavesi.
Thank you. I had my hand raised, but I would support a very soon scheduled working session. My main concern would be that we don't want to cause any more delays to the process. I would also keep on the timeline that we have, and I would think we are getting ready to have some kind of a jail committee meeting, because the jail committee is also a group made up of experts. And if we recommend to them that they reconsider some of the size options, then they can do that as experts. But we can get our questions answered in a quick working session.
So I'm hearing pretty much by consensus that now, according to our process, this is a new process, do we need a formal, I'm hearing consensus that everybody would like a working session. But now by our process, I'm looking at Mr. Fritz. Do we need a motion to move this to give direction? Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to create a working session to discuss this further, I think is what I'm hearing by consensus, but we need a motion. So Commissioner Jacob?
I will make a motion that we have a working session, but I'm going to say, to give everyone enough time to gather information, I'm going to say 2 weeks from today on the 7th, Tuesday on the 7th of July.
Oh, that's true.
Like 7 days is just kind of a surprise to.
Well, personally, I would say we need to draft our questions, and I don't know if we'll get answers realistically, if we'll get answers, but we do need to, yes, we need to ask the questions. Okay, so the motion is to establish a working session for Tuesday, July 7th to discuss the jail, revisiting the size of the jail. Correct?
Yes, I would certainly be open to doing it following the 14th, but it sounded like Commissioner Meyer thought there was more of an urgency. But we have our next regularly scheduled meeting. I would be open to having the discussion then.
The 14th, after the regular board meeting.
Earliest, I would say.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Meyer.
Yep, I talked to the administrator earlier today, and it was my understanding that he was thinking that the committee that will be doing the design is likely to meet quite soon. So I would say, yes, we should have the working session as soon as we can.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner.
Since we have the sheriff and several other key people in the room who have the data or are in the process of collecting the data, can we ask them, one of them, to give us some idea of the timeline on collecting some of the data?
Steve, can you answer to that?
Do you need more than a week, or do you need 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Well, so Madam Chair and board members, thank you. This is Steve. I hope you can see me and hear me.
You can.
We already have one of the staff actually working on what I'm going to call a comprehensive look at basically the 2019, how the people came into the jail, how they were charged, what brought them to the jail, under what charge, how they were released, basically off of the bail evaluation. So this comprehensive look would be relating to understanding why people came in, how they came in, if they committed another crime or basically were part of the recidivism rate, which I think is very important to try to understand how these numbers are happening. I don't think we need to go back any farther than that, because obviously the study that we did that was what I'm going to call a hand-picked members for the jail advisory committee. That was a year-long study that was done for over 10 years. So 10 years of extracted information was brought up, and it also included the 2019 information. But what we did not include, because it was unprecedented and unpredicted, obviously, this worldwide pandemic called COVID. So we didn't know that was going to happen. So we didn't have any of that into that study, per se, that we did for the jail advisory committee. So that's really the only missing part. So I think if we go back to have that comprehensive look, and Chief Deputy Mueller can chime in if I'm missing something here, but that's really the one and only small little piece that's really missing, other than going back for 10 to basically 15 years worth of absolute known information, what we needed for a jail, which I would like to review. So just so it's on everybody's plate, the other jails, me knowing the jail administrators and the sheriffs and stuff for my 30+ years working in the jail, they did not do this in-depth of a study as we did. So we really have a good foundation of it. I think we're just sort of looking at a blip in the road here. But with that in an answer, I think we can probably gather the majority of the information in a week. And we can obviously stay in very close contact with Administrator Ken Fritz to say we might need a little bit longer time, because I think it does have to be comprehensive. So it is very, what I'm going to say, relating to understanding. Everybody can understand the information. That's it.
And I think it really depends what the questions are that are kind of posed to us also, just on some of the questions that Steve, Commissioner Jacobs had answered. I think some of those can be answered in a relatively quick fashion. Depending on what some of the other questions are, will kind of depend, I think, on when we can come back, whether it's a week or 2 weeks, I guess, and how many questions there are.
Buswell is.
So it would be possible to meet. Oh, excuse me.
Commissioner addressing. Go ahead, Commissioner Kavesi. Okay.
I was just saying, so it would be possible to meet in a week and review the comprehensive data and some of the additional questions.
It would be a start.
I think that would be tough because not only do we have to gather the information, if we want to have it public, we have to put it in the agenda. We have to have it out several days ahead of time, which basically would give us 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah, I'm just trying not to delay the process, so.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Getting in for, just a minute, Sheriff. Let Mr. Fritz.
We cannot hear Ken. We see his lips, but we cannot hear him.
Oh, okay. Okay. Can you hear him now?
No.
Hold on.
Can't hear that, huh?
Can you use another mic?
You hear this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That mic must just be off or something. As far as the, I got feedback. As far as the, why am I getting feedback?
You gotta turn your.
Now you're unmuted on your computer, I think.
Oh, I got it. Okay. Sorry. There we go. All right. So as far as the committee goes, we have some work to do that we would talk to the architect about. We don't have plans for the current jail and the current LEC portion that we might have to interface with the new facility. So they have to do basically documentation of that facility. They have to do measurements. They have to, we're looking at getting a scanning company because you need to bring in devices that will give you the proper measurements and so forth. So they can actually create plans that they can use in the future to draw and connect their various parts to when they do move in, regardless what size it is. That can be done without having the committee meet. It's part of the process, for establishing the foundation for your engineering. The kickoff meeting for the committee probably wouldn't be, we were planning on having it around now, but then with the change in this dialogue, I put it off to wait and see what would happen tonight. So I think 2 weeks is fine. If we could schedule the committee meeting for a couple weeks from now, and kind of everything should come together pretty well then.
Maybe you need to, I don't think they heard you talk about meeting the deadlines of properly noticing the meeting.
Yeah, the reason I suggest that the week wouldn't be good enough is because what I'm understanding is that the commissioners want to be able to provide some questions for the staff to be able to then answer, and then we have to get that onto an agenda. Then we have to make sure the agenda is published, the weekend before.
Okay.
And so next Tuesday would be kind of hard.
So Commissioner Jacob, would you alter your motion to say the 14th? You had indicated the 7th in your motion. Would you indicate the 14th?
Yeah, 14th.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion to create a working session of the board and interested
I didn't
staff.
believe I ever said the 7th.
Yeah.
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 The first thing you said was the
7th.
And the 7th is actually 2 weeks from now. So
Yeah, 7th is 2 weeks.
Oh,
we could do the 7th.
Oh,
Yeah.
7th is 2 weeks.
But
Okay.
the
Yeah.
14th
is much
a week
better.
after, I mean, that much difference.
Yeah.
We can do the 7th.
Oh,
So the
okay.
14th would be on a day we're already meeting.
Yeah, we have a 9 o'clock board meeting on that day, so we can do it afterwards
That'd be good to me.
All right, so you want to restate your motion? Please.
My motion will be to have a working session following our next upcoming county board meeting, immediately following our next upcoming county board meeting.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Jacobs, seconded by Commissioner Olson to have a working session following our next scheduled board meeting, which would be July 14th. Okay, any other discussion?
Yes,
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you so much. I have a question for County Attorney Sonneman. I am wanting to know if the County Attorney's Office, the Public Defender, the prosecutor, the folks involved with the CJCC that currently run the diversion programs, would this allow them enough time to respond as well to how we might use diversion programs to decrease our jail population?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've got these on, but I've got my computer phone or thing on. Yeah, if you would, pose, or I don't know if Administrator Fritz would consolidate some questions for everybody. But if you could, give us your questions, we can provide, and I can do that as chair of the CJCC. Provide information on what you might be looking for, as well as updates on where the court is in terms of, they've pretty much completely gone to remote hearings, except in certain situations. And it's kind of a, as watching how things go, it's up to the Supreme Court how they decide how many, which hearings they want to have remotely or which not. So there's a lot of stuff up in the air still. But yeah, we can, if you give us some questions, and we can kind of try to put some stuff together as well on all the different programs that we have.
I don't think we're asking any staff to come up with the ultimate answers in this time. I mean, we're going to pose questions, and some will take longer research and some will be short and quickly answered. So it's a start.
Yes. Pardon me, Madam Chair. If there are questions that come up during the meeting, I think all of us are pretty prepared to answer, at least give our opinions. But the data that Captain Buswell was talking about, I think is going to be really helpful in terms of looking at the numbers. But like he said, it's COVID is with us, but it won't always be with us, hopefully. And so, we have to also look to the future beyond COVID as to what we need in a jail. So thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion. We have a second. Any more discussion?
Madam Chair.
Yeah, Commissioner Kavesi.
I have my hand up, and thank you.
I'm sorry. The hands are blue tonight. They are
whatever.
raising. Okay.
I noticed we moved from 2 weeks to 3 weeks, and I am concerned about the reason for that. We were first talking about if 1 week or 2 weeks would be sufficient, and I thought we had agreed that 2 weeks would be sufficient, and then now the motion is for 3 weeks out.
Well, we have a major holiday in there too, which I have a feeling that may impact some people's schedules. So I think personally, I think the important is if we have questions to get the questions to administration, and then administration can forward out the questions to start at minimum start gathering information if it's something that needs a lot of information. It's not, one meeting isn't going to resolve, I don't think, any of this total issue. So I see it as a work in progress.
No, but it will, the meeting will give some direction also to the jail planning committee.
Correct.
I would not be in favor of meeting on the 14th. I'd be still in favor of meeting on the 7th.
Motion is for the 14th.
Yes.
Commissioner Jacob.
I don't intend to amend the motion. I'm going to leave it at the 14th.
Okay.
I feel if the issue is important enough that it needs a working session, think everyone should have adequate time to prepare for it. And people's schedules, if we can do it on a day when we already have a county board meeting, I think it makes sense for people to be able to plan for it better, knowing that that's when we have a meeting coming up anyhow. So,
well, we have a motion. Sheriff Gander, you're raising your hand.
Yes, thank you. I just want to mention that our jail inspector came today, Jen Pfeiffer, and she was actually going to view this board meeting. We gave her the link to it. We explained what the discussion about the jail was going to be. And she just wanted to make sure that it was pointed out that the time is coming up really fast. September of 2021, we are sunsetted. And she says, we can't drag our feet. We need to get going on this. We can't just keep stalling. The state won't put up with or consider that. They need to see action from us.
Okay, maybe you want to invite her to the meeting on the 14th then. I would really love to have a conversation with that person to get direction as to what they will require in the future. That's one of my big questions.
Well, and that was a thing that we asked her today, and she said she didn't see, there's nothing, obviously herself and her boss are very busy, and she was telling us all the things that, especially her boss, Tim Thompson, has been going through with all this COVID. But they don't see any changes other than probably having to have, what do you call it, Steve? Positive airflow. Otherwise, she says she doesn't see any changes in the future for building of jails.
Okay, well, I'll give the governor and the lieutenant governor a call and ask them their ideas on corrections, because I think our society's taking a different turn. But
Madam Chair.
We'll discuss that at the meeting. Commissioner Meyer.
Thanks. I just want to confirm one more time with Administrator Fritz. Wait until the 14th, doesn't put a crimp in our plans, and that maybe we can go ahead and schedule that first kickoff meeting despite this?
Right. What I was
Oh, no, I can't hear you. No. No.
The picture shows you muted.
No, I know that.
Oh.
That's his laptop or whatever, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
No, we can sort of hear you now. Okay.
Here,
All right.
I'll turn the laptop on, but I don't. Okay, now hopefully I won't get feedback.
Yeah.
Maybe turn that off and get still getting feedback. I have no idea what the issue
We
is.
just want positive feedback.
Yeah, and positive airflow.
You can't hear me on that, right? No?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit now.
Okay.
You can't hear that.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
Okay.
go for it. Go for it.
All right, I'll try it. We'll schedule the meeting shortly after the 14th, and we'll also schedule time with the architect prior to the 14th to start their process in the jail and the accompanied parts of the building to start documenting that for the platform they need to eventually do the drawings. And
Okay.
We have the motion.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, Commissioner Kavesi?
Yes, so now you're saying that 3 weeks out is still keeping us on our timeline? Mr. Fritz?
No, I'm just saying that we can do some things in preparation for the fact that the meeting would be on the 14th, and we can not waste the time. But as far as the committee meeting, we have to wait till after the 14th so that we can incorporate any direction that the working group would give us.
Okay, so we are delaying that first meeting of the planning committee.
Yes, probably maybe
a week
or two, but we delayed it just recently with this discussion as well. I had to hold off on it as well.
Okay, so that's 2 delays. Thank you.
Okay, so let's, any other discussion, or we'll proceed to vote? We'll do roll call vote. Commissioner Meyer.
Meyer votes aye.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Kavesi votes no.
Okay, Commissioner Olson.
Olson votes aye.
Commissioner Jacob.
Jacob, aye.
And Ward votes aye. So, okay, motion passes. We will have a working session July 14th, following the board scheduled meeting. All right, thank you. Next item 7.5, approve or deny future agenda item to discuss budget parameters. I brought this one forward. Past history, I've worked with 3 different administrations, and every administration has had a different approach to budgeting. I do greatly appreciate the current administration and how we're doing budgeting and everything, but I personally feel that budgeting is probably our biggest responsibility as county commissioners. And with what's gone on in the last, 4 months of our lives in our, country and in government, what will be our economic conditions, what will be our regional service delivery models, what property taxes. We had a report from Mr. Hacken a week ago. Sales tax revenues, expenditures, fund balances, debt, our priorities. I just really feel that the county board needs to have a discussion to give maybe a little direction as to what a budget levy request should look like with all these different factors that have changed in our lives recently. And unfortunately, if I sit here and don't ask for this, I get handed a budget and I can never seem to get it to a lower amount, which my constituents are asking for, to really be cognizant of the economic conditions and everything that's going on in their lives. So I would like, again, a working session about budget. I know we're starting the process, and I think earlier better than late. No, that's just the board. Commissioner Jacob.
Yeah, I'll maybe speak to it somewhat. I feel a little bit like it's the cart and the horse, or the chicken and the egg. I feel like I need administration to bring forward their perspective of what the budget should be, and if we collectively as a board, we all have to be on the same page to really change that. The administration is going to bring forward probably a balanced budget based on where we've been in the past, and unless this board decides that they want to either cut some services or reduce some outside organizations' funding, I would want to see it. I would want to see what comes forward from administration before I schedule a working session to tell administration. I think you're saying you want to pick a number that you want to come up with to hold a levy to, or
possibly.
Okay. Without the information before me, I wouldn't be able to pick the number. So at this point, I feel like our budgets are as refined as we've ever seen. And there's still a split on the board on how far we're willing to go. So I feel like it probably would be asking quite a few people to take quite a bit of time, with ultimately only potentially 2 of the 5 commissioners being willing to support the cuts that you might be looking for. So I guess I'm happy with the process the way it is, so I'm not going to support what you want to do.
Okay. Well, I guess, there's a lot that has changed in the last 4 months.
I agree.
And so, again, if we don't address those early on, I feel that we're going to get a budget that my constituents can't afford. And I work for the constituents. Staff has done a good job in the past and everything, but we've always had a budget, and it's always increased considerably over the last 20 years. It's my time, it's gone up considerably. Of course, I've always been in the minority, but I got to fight to keep it as low as I can. If I don't have support, I don't have support. I think administration knows my feelings, and we need to take into effect, what's going to happen with our revenue stream, what's going to happen with our expenditures. A lot of things maybe we will be doing regionally, and will it save us money, or will it, you know, what are we looking at as far as future expenditures and things? Sometimes regionalization isn't saving us any money. Look at the water planning. We're still doing water planning locally. We're supporting potentially two separate things, so it all costs money.
Well, the other fear that I would have with your plan is you're opening a can of worms that could work just the opposite of what you're expecting. You could have 3 county commissioners that decide, I want this, 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 and this, and here's the door to throw it in.
Yeah, it could.
And right now, we're probably going to have a balanced budget brought forward that we can all look at face value and make decisions from there, just like we.
But you're saying a balanced budget on a 0% increase in levy? Is that what you're indicating? I mean, I don't know what your definition of balanced budget is.
A budget that pays for what services we're providing.
Currently?
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Okay, Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. I know that the budget is an important part of our job, maybe the most important part of our job. And I don't think anyone who is on the Board of Commissioners wants high taxes. But the reality is that we are subject to how much aid we get from the state and what programs we're mandated by the state to provide. And our staff they're all in unions, and we have negotiated contracts. And so I think that over the time that I've been watching, we have eliminated the fat. The things that we don't have to do, Winona County is not doing them. Our staff count is down from where it was 10 years ago. And so honestly, I don't think that there's a lot of value. And I certainly don't think that we can mandate a levy not knowing what the funding from the state will be and what the programs are that we have to support. I don't see how that works. It's just not within our power. So I don't see much point of holding a special session to have that conversation.
Commissioner Olson.
I appreciate Commissioner Meyer's comments, and I'm somewhat taken back by Commissioner Jacob. You're pointing fingers at 3 fellow commissioners. There's not one of us that want to raise taxes. We all do our part and try to keep the county functioning. We've all participated in the cuts that we've established over the last 10 years, and I take offense to pointing fingers, and I'm guessing I'm one of the 3, because we've worked through the budget process. Nobody here has come up with solutions as far as cutting, other than cutting services and cutting employees. So we all do what we can, and we support administration coming forth with a budget proposal, especially knowing the situation we're in. That's what they're paid to do.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a participant in the previous budgets, I think we have set some very lean budget years. We have not had new programs. We've decreased staff. And again, as Commissioner Meyer pointed out, we are totally dependent on state allocations and some of the mandates that are given to us. So I think it would be very short-sighted if we tried to set a ceiling or a levy that the budget could not go over. That doesn't sound like a process that would work very well to me. I also have constituents. We all have constituents that are on fixed incomes, and again, no one really does want to raise taxes. What we want to do is provide the best range of services in the most efficient and effective way. And our budget process has been providing discussion and a timeline that we can review information and we can develop a budget that does those things. So I would like to stick with our current or our past procedures. Certainly there will be discussion on some of the COVID impact because it's there. It's not, it's not something we can ignore. But I think, our best option at this time looks like to go and stay the course on our regular budget timeline and let Administrator Fritz and the staff work up their part of it, and then we start there. Thank you.
Okay, it's a dead, I can see that it's a dead issue.
I want to respond to Commissioner Olson.
Okay, Commissioner Jacob.
Commissioner Olson, I feel like I'm merely just stating what is. There's been 3-2 votes on the budget in the past, and I know you've consistently made the comment about that you're willing to carry the water, but you're carrying water that I don't want carried. You're spending money and calling it water. The reason the votes are 3-2 is because when I vote against a budget or a levy, it's because I am putting forward some alternative, something that I'm willing to cut, something that I'm willing to do. And it simply is all voted by 3-2. And it just is what it is. So maybe I should just refer to the two of us instead of 3-2. I don't know, but it's not meant to be a personal attack. It's just the realities that we're in.
Okay, it's a dead issue.
Okay.
I'll continue to do my thing and work hard to keep it to a minimum for my constituents and all the constituents, because the world has changed and we need to reflect the change. 7.6, discuss and provide direction on the potential use of CARES Act funding. Well, our legislators gave us no clarity.
I think I figured it out.
Oh, okay, you got it working, Ken?
Yeah, I was muted over here. I figured it out. Heidi had muted me.
I'll recognize Ken. Oh, Heidi.
Thank you,
Ken.
Heidi.
I don't think you should take that personally, though.
No, I had to move from one side to the other because the sun was right in my face and she had muted this side.
Okay.
So anyway,
Right.
yeah, it kind of ties into the budget in a number of ways. The CARES Act funding, and I provided a memo to the board in the packet, and it pretty much outlines the background, so I don't need to really go over that a lot. The bottom line is that the federal government gave the state money. It's called the CARES Act. It's basically to deal with the economic impact of COVID for local governments. They're in the process of trying to figure out how much money to allocate to the local cities and counties and townships, and in what way to do it, and the total amount. So the special legislation session did not yield a decision, so we're put off now a little while. There's some discussion as whether the legislature, when they pick things back up, I think on the 13th of July, whether they'll deal with it or the governor also has the ability to do it from an executive standpoint, although the amount of money he wants to release is substantially less than what the legislature has been, which basically has a compromise on right now. There were too many other legislative issues, I think, in the works that to deal with this particular one. So that's why it got pushed aside, along with a lot of other legislation. So anyway, what I wanted to do tonight is, in order to accommodate these funds, there's a lot of work we have to do internally. The funds are there's some of it that may be prescribed. For instance, 10% of the funds has to go to homeless, economic assistance for individuals, those people affected by COVID directly. And to do that, we need to have a partner, and we've been working with volunteer services, for instance, to create, we've been doing this on the homeless prior to this point, to find a way to funnel that money to the appropriate people based on criteria and the adherence to those criteria. There's been a talk about possibly using some of the money for mental health support. Come the fall, and actually fairly soon, some of the economic initiatives, especially the unemployment subsidy, is going to run out, and some people might be in a situation where their loss of a job plus that could mean economic trouble. There's also the issue of the stay on evictions is coming to the end. So people who haven't paid their rent for a couple months may face the possibility of eviction, and this money is available to help with those kind of things. So keeping people from becoming homeless, keeping people that are homeless in shelters, not more individualized shelters, so that they're not congregating and spreading COVID. And then in the fall, whatever comes with, if there's additional COVID cases, it's to combat that. There are several things I put in the memo that I suggest we could look at, and I can bring back more concrete plans on, but I wanted to get some feedback from the board on if they thought there were any specific areas they felt that we should emphasize more than the others. If they felt that the outline seemed kind of reasonable, but there might be things we want to look at, or maybe the allocations a little bit differently. One of the ones that's in there that is significant is an economic assistance for businesses. We would have to create, and a number of counties have done this already. They've created an application process. You partner with an accountant or law firm to do the tracking and to pre-qualify everyone, or you go through the criteria and then issue grants in that situation. I've also talked to HBC, who can provide rural broadband expansion into areas that we wouldn't normally be able to afford, or that couldn't be covered by the grants at the state level because of the subsidy rate. And so I was suggesting that we could do that. All this has to be done within, by the end of December, the beginning of December 2020. If you don't spend the money by then, it goes back to the state government, and then they decide what they want to do with it. So any need that we have in the county has to be identified fairly quickly, and then some mechanism to get that the funding to the right people if we intend to use it for those purposes. We can use it for covering expenses that the county has, and one of the things that the act does is it presumes that public health expenditures, public safety expenditures, and health and human service expenditures are automatically covered and eligible for the funding. We have about $15 million in that kind of expense over the course of the time that COVID has been in place and will be in place through 2020. And so most of the counties have been looking at doing maybe 50% of the allocation to cover their own expenses, and then the other 50% to move into these programs and so forth. That's not set in stone, but that's kind of the feeling of at least the MICA counties that we've been working with. That kind of ties into that budget discussion, in that while we can't use money for subsidizing revenues that we may lose, we can pay for the services this year, and that money then in effect would be available next year to offset the levy. So it does play into the budget, the portion that we pay ourselves.
See, I'm confused there. Even somebody that works in public health, you're saying we can claim their wages even though they would have been still doing their job?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, see, that's craziness in government.
It's written, and I sent you the eligibility criteria. They're right in there. Yeah, it sounds a little strange, but one of the things that the government decided was that because for efficiency and to make it simple as possible, they would just presume that those expenses were COVID related, and that you could pay for them. So, and that's actually a good thing for us. And actually, if you think about it, it kind of does make sense, because what they're doing is they're providing the money now, realizing that, I mean, the whole intention of the money is to kind of offset the economic impact of things, right, of COVID. Well, in order to do that, if we're not raising taxes next year, we're actually keeping money in people's pockets because they're not paying, so you're helping the taxpayers in that respect. You can't rebate it directly back to the taxpayers, but by keeping it, but using it for the purposes that I mentioned in terms of the money that's paying the county back, we could offset our levy, our potential levy. And so all that has to kind of be worked out. We don't know all the particulars. That's kind of where it's at today. That's the direction it's going in. And for this part of it, I want to bring back kind of a little more of a fleshed out plan on how we might spend the money to get it into the economy locally. And that's kind of what this is about. So if you have any feedback based on what I sent you, I'd like to gather it now. And then the next time I come back to the county board, I can flesh together something a little more specific.
Kavesi. Commissioner Kavesi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your laying this out and the clarity that is attached. I think it's I have some questions about the process. And if you're saying, according to the legislation, 10% of the funds are required to be used by homeless and other economic assistance and businesses. Okay, because I was going to say we had 10% for homeless and other economic assistance, and then your recommendation is 2%. And I wasn't sure how that figure came to be. Do we have data on housing, evictions, or anything? Do we have any way to predict what kind of problems people are going to be in? Does DEED have that, or where could we get that quickly?
Well, let me answer two questions. One is the 2%, actually the 10% has to be spent on individual economic assistance, homeless, and business assistance.
Yeah, I saw that.
So when you add the money that's there for business assistance along with the individual homeless one that's called out there, it's well over the 10%. So that satisfies that criteria. And that's actually a criteria that the legislature, I think, added to it. So it may come through, it may change or whatever. The issue of finding the individuals, that's tricky. We've already tried to do that as much as possible through the hub, the community hub, volunteer services, our own social services. We refer people into that system. Right now, it's kind of strange right now, and this is true of mental health actually too. Normally, in a situation where you have high unemployment, our social service needs grows quickly, right? It's not happening right now, and neither is our mental health load. The mental health load at the Winona Health and in Hiawatha is actually less than it normally is. And talking to those agencies, we're all in a situation where we think that's going to change, and so this money would be available when it does change, and then we start to see more people needing eviction assistance, more people needing, coming to us that are homeless, or coming to volunteer services, or coming to the county for assistance. That's when we'll be able to then provide that economic assistance. But we just don't have the numbers right now because they pump so much money into the economy with the unemployment and with the PPP, the payroll protection program, that it's kind of buoying those things up right now. And until they come to an end, we don't have that rush yet.
I agree wholeheartedly with your analysis, but you also said the unemployment ends soon. We don't know if people will have balloon payments for rent or can be evicted. Right. And all the tax levels have been postponed to July 15th. So I guess my question was a couple questions in general, the boundaries of these percents. If we need more than 2%, can we get more from one of the other groups? Because I'm thinking this individual assistance at 2% may not be enough, but we don't know. But if it turns out that it isn't enough, can we change some of those percents?
Yeah, those percentages are just for discussion purposes, really. There's no science behind them. And so what'll happen, or what I envision happening, is we have to set the criteria for programs. So, let's say for business economic assistance, you might have a cap. Then you have to see what kind of, same with economic assistance for individuals, and you're going to need to do it in phases so that you can't have money to shift around at the county board. So if we come to the county board and say, boy, we've had 100 businesses sign up for this and can show economic distress, and so we're, that money's, we need money there, but we don't need it on the other side, then that's fine. Or we can, move one from one to the other. It's a really difficult thing because we're going to have to do this kind of on the fly, but it's got to be very flexible.
That's what I was concerned about. Okay, the other question I had overall is how are we going to make sure that we're not duplicating? We heard tonight that SMIF, the Southern Minnesota initiative, has money for businesses. Do you have plans for the EDA to look into some of that, to set some of the boundaries for that 25% that is going for small business and farming? Or how are we going to make sure that that's not something they can get someplace else? And that is maybe where we could put some more money into some of the other categories.
Yeah, there's two parts to that question. Again, the one is the eligibility criteria doesn't require you to determine if it's not the grant of last resort. So you can use the money even if they have some other income. It's very difficult to figure that their financial situations out. So the government realizes that, and they're basically saying, you know, if they can satisfy you that they have some economic impact, you know, and the county has to determine what that is, and then they'll allocate the money. As far as the economic the economic development committee or commission authority, I think they don't have the resources to actually run the program. What we might do, and I've talked to Kay a little bit about this, but what we might do is include them in terms of their expertise in lending, you know, because they do have a lending committee where they can look at the criteria. Maybe they can be the ones that say yes or no on the application, but we need somebody else. We'll have to pay for a resource to actually manage the program outside of us because we don't have the resources to do that. So it's going to be one of these things where that's how we might handle the business assistance one, the individual one. You know, maybe we'll do it through volunteer services, mental health, maybe through Hiawatha and the hospital. You know, so we're going to have a lot of partners, and it's really one of those things where they realize that it's going to be difficult. It's going to be on the fly, and they've made allowances for that. But in the end, we will have to justify where the money went. So we have to keep good records of, you know, making sure that we can provide that information to the state and the federal government.
Okay, I have one other question, but I'll hold it until to allow some other discussion to go on. So thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you, Madam. Ken, I would just say, pardon me, Administrator Fritz, I would just say that, you know, I think I've said this to you before. I support what you're doing and shifting the percentages around. However, that's fine. I mean, in general, my advice has been this is reimbursement, but it's also for economic development and a stimulus. And so I want us to make sure that we spend it all and that we don't end up having to give it back, because it's our taxpayers that will benefit from it, and it's our taxpayers' money. And so, you know, if we need to hire someone to help us to figure out and manage the programs, I'm all for that, especially if we can use funds from this program to pay for it. If I was going to make one pitch, it would be, I was in the meeting for the Rural Child Care Initiative program today. Their research from back in last year indicated that there's hundreds of families in the county that can't go to work because they need childcare, and there is a drastic shortage, and it's pretty expensive. And it's been made worse for the childcare providers because they're now can only have kids at 50%, and they are buying all kinds of special products for cleaning and sterilizing. And our emergency management can't help them with that because they don't really qualify. So I would want to make sure that, along with the farmers, especially those farmers who've had to euthanize some of their livestock, or where their prices have dropped and they're having hard times, but that we really share this with the businesses that have had impacts as a result of COVID. So thanks, and thanks for all your research. And, you know, I understand that if Governor Walz is the one that does the allocation, it'll probably be substantially smaller. So
it's still a lot of money, though, and even if he's with his numbers as well. So yeah, it's a challenge, but I think the goal of getting it back into the community, you know, is important.
Yep, thanks.
Madam Chair, Kay Qualley, just a quick comment if you have time.
Go ahead.
So from the standpoint of managing staff, you know, through the COVID-19 situation, as well as comments that we're hearing from business, broadband inequalities, as well as childcare issues, which had reared themselves long before this, you know, are two very major things. We have a small enough pool of loans currently outstanding that we've only had one that is, a salon that's asked for loan deferment for 3 months. But I can see the restaurant industry not doing well as we start coming into fall and winter. I have a little experience with this with my son as a general manager of a 2-restaurant operation, but also just the idea that you can't get separated enough inside for people to feel comfortable that are sort of my age group and older. And so, that might be another area that we could look at a little bit. And my last point was that some of the smaller cities, St. Charles, Goodview, and Lewiston, are getting together just to do some brainstorming on this, and we'll share the results immediately with Administrator Fritz, and he can pass along what seems important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kay. Kay kind of hit on a topic that hit my attention, is that we've got a lot of townships and small cities that don't have staff and don't have resources to run these type of programs. So, but I'm not sure what the township's expenses were related to COVID. I mean, we had a lot of culverts wash out in storms, but I don't think that was related to COVID. So, so I mean, all that, again, that spend it or lose it, I hate that approach, but that's what we're handed. So how would townships benefit from all the dollars that are listed there?
They have to be able to, it has to be eligible. So if they don't have an expense that's eligible, they basically have to give it back.
So can we, in our research, maybe look at, keep the lens open of what would a township have spent money on that might be eligible, so that we're not leaving all that? Well, and they have, so they're all businesses, all the townships got farms and businesses, small businesses.
And it depends, because the way it's structured, there's an allocation for the cities, but you have to be a certain size.
Right.
And then there's an allocation for the county, obviously, and then there's an allocation for the townships as well.
Right.
So there's a few that fall under that. I think it's city less than 250.
I saw a couple, like I think Stockton wasn't or something.
So that's one where they would say to us, hey, we had this expense, and then we would pay it out of the money that we get. But the regular townships and the cities that are on that list that I had in there,
right,
will get their allocation, and then they need to decide what to do with it.
Well, but my point is, I guess we need to somehow help coordinate that.
Madam
There's
Chair?
a lot of money sitting there, townships, that I don't know, but if they can run a business loan program for their farmers, or, we've got some little restaurants out in the unincorporated areas.
Yeah.
But again, they don't have the resources to manage that.
Well, it's not a loan program. It's just it's a grant. So it's not, you don't have to pay it back.
Right.
And what a lot of the counties have done, some of the smaller ones and some of the ones that are they're actually ones out there already accepting applications, assuming they're going to get the money. It's a simple one-page form that, it's very simple. And I think that right away, our thought on that is, well, how are you going to prove all this? And do they really have that impact? And, they've pretty much made it could be that easy. It can be, yes, I have a business. Yes, we had, impact. I attest to it, whatever. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of verification that's going to go on in those situations. So they don't need a big, wild program, for a smaller township.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. It was my understanding from the MICA board meeting that if they have a fire department, and if they have any COVID expenses, that they could use this against their part of the match.
Right.
Right. So they could use it that way. But I think I also am hearing you say that you are suggesting that perhaps we, the county, could help them if they need assistance to set up or manage some kind of assistance grants, right?
I think for most of them, it's going to be so small that if they cover their fire department, or if they cover, or if they have a small loan program, I mean, we can certainly help, but I don't know that they're going to really need a lot of assistance on that. And some of them will probably not have any COVID-related expenses, and they'll, the farmer, they might not be able to give enough money to make it worthwhile for someone who may come to the county then, and,
Well,
perhaps it would.
I think Commissioner Meyer understands what I'm trying to get. So I'm looking here at Pleasant Hill Township. Okay, by the chart you gave us, they have 527 people. They've got 13,175. I know of 2 little restaurants that were greatly impacted by COVID. But so how do we get Pleasant Hill and that 13,000 or whatever figure it is into those businesses? Again, Pleasant Hill.
The township will get the allocation. and then they basically have to just decide who they're going to give the money to.
Can we provide them with a little guidance? If we have a form that we're using to set it up, can we provide a packet to them?
Sure.
Or will the Township Association provide that?
We can work with the Township
don't know.
Association.
They
That
haven't,
makes
they haven't
sense.
met, yeah, unfortunately, yeah, they haven't been meeting because of
Yeah,
COVID, so.
but, I mean,
Right.
we can still work through them.
Yeah. But that is what you're asking for, right,
Yeah,
Commissioner Ward?
yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I don't want to get in a situation where we're trying to run, 19 programs.
No, but I mean, there's a
for
lot of,
townships, but at the same time, if we work through their township association, I think that makes sense.
yes, because there's a lot of money in the
Yeah.
townships.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I think, well,
I
Wilson
think like you
probably
said,
gets the
two
most.
restaurants could take that $13,000 fairly quickly, and
Yeah,
you know,
and I mean, if
and-
it's there and that's what it's designed
Right,
for, then we should help them
Yeah,
get it.
I totally agree. I completely agree.
Okay.
Okay,
Gotcha.
so we'll work through, maybe we put a note out to the township to view.
Yeah, well, we got to get our act together too.
Right, right, and, yes, because like when we have a flood, we do
Yeah.
it all together,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
Okay,
this is going to be interesting.
yes, stay tuned. Okay, any other questions related to the CARES Act funding? All right, stay tuned. Commissioner Kavesi, you had 2 announcements.
You're on mute.
We can't hear you, Commissioner Kavesi.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
I sat in on the SHAC meeting on Monday. It was a virtual meeting, and it was quite informative. The Community Health Conference, which is usually held in October-ish, is canceled for this year. Commissioner Malcolm had some more statistics. She had some more information. The virus is 4 times more deadly than the flu virus. The asymptomatic transmission is a high concentration, and it's much more easily transmitted overall through the air than we thought. So she was just saying, right now we're at a plateau rather than a decline in our numbers, but we're watching it very carefully, and she's still providing the updates and the data, which we said was very helpful. Some of the discussion, there were 2 of us that asked about border counties with influence from from another state, and that we had noticed a spike in our numbers probably because of that. And they agreed it was a unique challenge. This is the governor. He said, yes, the border counties do have a unique set of challenges, and we need clear sets of guidance. So not sure how we're going to keep that or set it up, but people also talked about housing needs, and they talked about there was real consensus that COVID is not going away. And that there's quite a lot of skepticism, that commissioners are getting quite a lot of questions like about how serious it really is and things like that. Now, when the governor came on, they wanted, people hit him pretty hard about distributing the money. We asked him to see if he could distribute that CARES money by the end of this week. And he was going to go back to the legislators because they did agree on somewhat of a compromise on that. And he was going to talk to them and see if we could implement so far what they have come up with. So that was where we stood on that. We said, get the money out now, that kind of thing. But it was overwhelmingly information to the governor that we need that money as soon as possible. There's 2 blue ribbon committees going on. One is looking at kind of what have we altered while we're in this period of pandemic. What would we like to keep from that alteration, and what we can learn from those changes that we've made. And the other one is The other, there's a housing blue ribbon committee going on, I believe. So I'm not sure what the second one was. I didn't get all of that. But they were very aware of the border situations. Commissioner Malcolm's advice was double down on mask wearing, hand washing, social distancing. Don't take anything out of that mix. And small groups back to groups of 10. And Houston was the other county that commented on that. They've had, I believe their statistics today showed 15 cases, whereas before they had 1 or 2 positive cases. So they shot up dramatically. The second area that I wanted to comment on is I attended the primary prevention project meeting on Monday, and I'm going to try to hold a book up before the camera and see if I can get it in range. Oh, it's backwards. Okay, there is a book that the PPP is distributing. It's actually called the Swimwear Lesson, so that's backwards. That's a mirror image, but it's a children's book, and it's intended for parents or daycare people or teachers to sit down with children who may have some questions about.
Could you try again? No. I'm trying to shut.
Okay, it's just a book that's and it comes with a resource guide in the back about how to have this kind of discussion with your child. It involves the fact that your swimsuit basically covers your private parts, and if anyone is, trying to invade on them, you need to tell a trusted adult or your parents. But the primary prevention project is planning. They have a grant, and they still have. They're using some of the allocated money that we provide for them to distribute this book to the libraries, to all the elementary schools, and to daycare centers, and then work with early childhood for parents and things like that. So they want to get this book out in wide distribution. I believe they're ordering about 200 copies. So this is going to be out soon. And also Paperbacks and Pieces, the bookstore on Mankato, she is going to stock them as part of her regular stock. So they're trying to give real high visibility to this topic and to this particular book as a resource for parents and for teachers. So it'll be out there soon. So just wanted to pass that on.
All right. Commissioner Kavesi triggered at the One Watershed, One Plan. Bowser was a little worried about money. And that's the Clean Water Legacy, because it's all based on sales tax. So that's part of the revenue stream. With that, any other business to come before the board at this time? If not, entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn. Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Olson, seconded by Commissioner Jacob. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We're adjourned.
Roll call.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
Be careful driving. I don't know if the storm hit or not, but.
How do you shut this thing off?